Mark Twain grew up in Hannibal, Missouri, at the edge of the Mississippi River. From the earliest time he could remember, Twain longed to work on the river.
When I was a boy, there was but one permanent ambition among my comrades on the village of the west bank of the Mississippi River. That was to be a steamboatman. We had transient ambitions of other sorts, but they were only transient. When a circus came and went, it left us all burning to become clowns. The first Negro minstrel show that came to our section left us all suffering to try that kind of life. Now and then, we had a hope that if we lived and were good, God would permit us to be pirates. These ambitions faded out, each in its turn, but the ambition to be a steamboatman always remained.
In his teens, he was a printer's apprentice, a typesetter, and a writer of articles and humorous sketches. At age 18, he left Hannibal and worked as a printer in New York City, Philadelphia, St. Louis, and Cincinnati. He was self-educated, mostly by reading in public libraries whenever he could find the time. At 22, Twain returned to Missouri, where on a trip to New Orleans he met the steamboat pilot, Horace E. Bixby, who inspired Twain to finally pursue his dream. In order to get training and his pilot's license, Twain borrowed a not inconsiderable sum from his brother. Yet he knew if he succeeded, he could quickly repay the debt. Wages for the steamboat pilots were about $3,000 a year, equivalent to a $150,000 salary today. During the 19th century, pilots, not captains, were the masters of steamboats, and Twain was eager to take on the most powerful job on the river. Many years later, he would write Life on the Mississippi, a highly romanticized remembrance of America in a former age. It details his careers on these steamboats, which were made of wood and powered by huge steam boilers kept at high pressure by wood-burning fires.
My chief was presently hired to go on a big New Orleans boat, and I packed my satchel and went with him. She was a grand affair. The moment we were underway, I began to prowl about the great steamer and fill myself with joy. She was as clean and as dainty as a drawing room. When I looked down her long gilded saloon, it was like gazing through a splendid tunnel. She had an oil picture by some gifted sign painter on every stateroom door. She was glittered with no end of prism-fringed chandeliers. The clerk's office was elegant, the bar was marvelous, and the barkeeper had been barbered and upholstered at incredible cost. The boiler deck, i.e. the second story of the boat, so to speak, was as spacious as a church. It seemed to me, so with the forecastle, and there was no pitiful handful of deckhands, firemen, and roustabouts down there, but a whole battalion of men. The fires were fiercely glaring from a long row of furnaces, and over them were 8 huge boilers. This was unmutterable pomp, the mighty engines. But enough of this. I had never felt so fine before, and when I found that the regiment of natty servants respectively served me, my satisfaction was complete.
One famous section in Life on the Mississippi is an analogy, an extended metaphor, comparing the river to a book. It uses metaphors and similes about language and writing to explain how he saw the river when he was a cub or beginning pilot, and how he later understood it when he was very experienced.
The Face of the Water, in time, became a wonderful book, a book that was a dead language to the uneducated passenger, but which told its mind to me without reserve, delivering its most cherished secrets as clearly as if it uttered them with a voice. And it was not a book to be read once and thrown aside, for it had a new story to tell every day. Throughout the long 1,200 miles, there was never a page that was void of interest, never one you could leave unread without loss, never one that you would want to skip, thinking you could find higher enjoyment in some other thing.
In a modern world, in which passenger ferries, cruise lines, and container ships travel daily, it may be hard to understand why these steamboats were so dangerous. The boats were flat-bottomed and shallow, so that they could sail near the river shores and make frequent stops to pick up passengers, cargo, and fuel wood. Though usually elegantly gaudy, the crafts were also fragile, and vulnerable. The safe water depth was 2 fathoms. 1 fathom equals 6 feet. And when the measuring chain sank 12 feet, the crewman called out, "Mark Twain!" the famous phrase which Clemens later borrowed for his pen name.
There never was so wonderful a book written by man, never one whose interest was so absorbing, so unflagging, so sparkingly renewed with every reperusal. The passenger who could not read it was charmed with a peculiar sort of faint dimple on its surface, on the rare occasion when he did not overlook it altogether. But to the pilot there was an italicized passage. Indeed, it was more than that. It was a legend of the largest capitals with a string of shouting exclamation points at the end of it. For it meant that a wreck or a rock was buried there that could tear the life out of the strongest vessels that ever floated. It is the faintest and simplest expression that water ever makes, and the most hideous to a pilot's eyes. In truth, the passenger who could not read this book saw nothing but all manner of pretty pictures in it, painted by the sun and shaded by the clouds, whereas to the trained eye, these were not pictures at all, but the grimmest and most dead earnest of reading matter.
A shallow place or a floating log, for example, could put a hole in the boat's wood, allowing cold water to hit the hot boiler, which exploded, accompanied by a fire. Accidents were common. Passengers and crew were injured or killed, valuable cargo lost. It was the pilot's job to prevent such disaster and losses. Therefore, a steamboat pilot, Twain himself explains, needed a vast and detailed knowledge of the ever-changing river to go up and down it in both daytime and at night. Twain's trips covered 2,000 miles of the Mississippi for more than 2 years. He states that he memorized it before he received his steamboat pilot license in 1859.
Now, when I mastered the language of the water and had come to every trifling feature that bordered the great river as familiarity as I knew the letters of the alphabet, I had made a valuable acquisition, but I had lost something too. I had lost something which could never be restored to me while I lived. All the grace, the beauty, the poetry had gone out of the majestic river.
While training, Twain got a job as a clerk for his younger brother Henry. Working on the steamboat Pennsylvania, Henry was killed on June 21, 1858, when it exploded. Twain was guilt-stricken, holding himself responsible for his brother's death over the rest of his life.
I still keep in mind a certain wonderful sunset, which I witnessed when steamboating was new to me. A broad expanse of the river was turned to blood in the middle of distance. The red hue brightened into gold, through which a solitary log came floating, black and conspicuous. In one place a long slanting mark lay sparkling upon the water. In another the surface was broken by boiling, tumbling rings that were as many-tinted as an opal. Where the ruddy flush was faintest was a smooth spot that was covered with graceful circles and radiating lines, ever so delicately traced. The shore on the left was densely wooded, and the somber shadow that fell from this forest was broken in one place by a long, ruffled trail that shone like silver. And high above the forest wall, a clean-stemmed dead tree waved a single leafy bow that glowed like a flame in the unobstructed splendor that was flowing from the sun. There were graceful curves, reflected images, woody heights, soft distances, and over the whole scene, far and near, the dissolving lights drifted steadily, enriching it, every passing moment, with new marvels of coloring. I stood like one bewitched. I drank it in a speechless rapture. The world was new to me, and I had never seen anything like this at home. But a day came when I ceased to note the glories and the charms which the moon and the sun and the twilight wrought upon the river's face. I ceased altogether to note them. Then, if that same sunset scene could be repeated, I would look upon it without rapture, and would comment upon it inwardly after this fashion. This sun means that we're going to have wind tomorrow. That floating log means the river is rising. Small thanks to it. That slanting mark on the water refers to a bluff reef which is going to kill somebody's steamboat one of these nights. If it keeps on stretching out like that, those tumbling boils show a dissolving bar and a changing channel there. The lines and the circles in the slick water over yonder are a warning that the troublesome place is shoaling up dangerously. That silver streak in the shadow of the forest is the break from a new snag, and he has located himself in the very best place he could have found to fish for steamboats. That tall dead tree with a single living branch is not going to last long. And then, how is a body ever going to get through this blinded place at night without the friendly old landmark? No, the romance and the beauty were all gone from the river. All the value any feature of it had for me now was the amount of usefulness it could furnish toward compassing the safe piloting of a steamboat.
Mark Twain continued to work on the river, and served as a river pilot until the American Civil War broke out in 1861, and traffic along the Mississippi slowed, then disappeared, to be replaced by railroads.
Since those days, I have pitied doctors from my heart. What does the lovely flush of a beauty's cheek mean to a doctor but a break that ripples above some deadly disease? Are not all her visible charms sown thick with what are to him the signs and symbols of hidden decay? Does he ever see her beauty at all? Or doesn't he simply view her professionally and comment about her unwholesome condition, all to himself?
Twain was born when Halley's Comet appeared in 1837. He predicted he would die when it returned. In 1910, when Halley's Comet reappeared, Twain did indeed pass with it. 100 years later, we are still reading and learning lessons from another natural force Twain was preoccupied with: the mighty Mississippi River.